Hello everyone, and welcome to Earth Archives. Think Vikings were just horn-helmeted, bearded sea raiders who robbed the rich and gave to the poor? Think again. They were not only pirates but also explorers, merchants, kings, and even shaped the entire course of European history. Today, we're diving deep into this fierce group from the north, from the legendary Ragnar to the real king who built the North Sea Empire, King Canute, unveiling the wild yet clever, brutal yet strategic history behind Viking culture. Want to know why the Vikings set sail? Why they raided? And how they transformed from savage pirates into rulers and cultural heroes? Then you absolutely can't miss this episode. Remember to subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment telling us which Viking character you'd most want to be, and share this video with your friends who love history and thrilling adventures. You might not know this, but Vikings were actually just like you and me. They ate, slept, and dreamed. Only their dreams were rarely peaceful. They dreamed of burning villages, looting cities, seizing treasures and wives, and even building a North Sea empire that stretched across England, Denmark, and Norway. These fierce men, clad in furs with flowing beards and rowing their longships, were not just axe-wielding pirates. They were skilled traders, kingdom builders, and influential figures who shaped European history. Vikings were not a single ethnic group, but a way of life. They came from the cold north, yet with fiery ambition and incredible seafaring skills, they conquered half of Europe. They didn't just raid English monasteries, they landed in France, ventured deep into Russia, and even traded with the Byzantine Emperor. Their longships were light and fast, able to navigate rivers and seas like today's fighter jets, quick, agile, and hard to catch. The Vikings we all know today are no longer just a few lines in history textbooks. They've become iconic ancient figures, standing alongside American cowboys, Japanese samurai, and Western European knights in popular culture. With flowing long hair, thick beards, clad in furs, faces fierce with battle rage, wielding massive axes or double-edged swords, standing at the prow of their longships yelling into the raging sea, they look like the rock stars of the Nordic world. They're warriors in anime, protagonists in video games, wild and sexy heroes on TV shows, and all this has long transcended history to become a shared cultural fantasy. But here's the funny thing. Many of these instantly recognizable images come from artistic embellishments. Take that iconic horned helmet, for example. That's actually a historical misconception. Real Viking warriors wouldn't dare wear such cumbersome, door-catching gear on the battlefield. It was a 19th century romantic opera director who added the horns to make Vikings look wilder. Ironically, this happy accident became one of the world's most enduring symbols of Viking identity. Of course, modern people's fascination with the Vikings' rough, fearless image isn't without reason. In a high-pressure, rule-bound society that values refinement and efficiency, Vikings symbolize that most primal form of free will. They refuse to obey, won't be controlled, show no mercy, and hide nothing. They take what they want, seize whoever they fancy, and when they conquer, they burn villages and plant their flags to claim the land. This raw, almost savage decisiveness honestly fulfills a deep modern desire to break free from constraints and rules. However, if you think Vikings were just simple-minded, muscle-bound sea bandits, you're way off. In reality, they were not only fierce warriors, but also skilled sailors, traders, and colonizers. They sailed their longships from Norway and Denmark all the way to the British Isles and Frankish lands, then eastward to Kievan Rus, and even ventured into the Mediterranean and North Africa. The earliest Europeans to land in North America were probably Vikings as well. So rather than mere pirates, the title explorers fits them much better. But have you ever wondered, who exactly were they? Why did they set sail? Why did they raid? And how did a seemingly wild and disorganized group of pirates manage to build kingdoms and spheres of influence stretching across Northern Europe, Western Europe, and even as far as Russia and the Mediterranean? These questions are more fascinating and far more complex than you might think. First, we need to clarify where the term Viking actually comes from. Although we've long been used to calling those longship riding, scruffy-faced northern raiders who turned other people's villages into bonfire parties. Vikings. The origin of the word itself is much murkier and more debated than you might imagine. Currently, there are 6 main hypotheses widely accepted in academia regarding the origin of the term Viking, based on studies of Old Norse, Old English, and other ancient languages. Some scholars believe that Viking may derive from the Old Norse word vik, meaning bay or inlet, referring to the gathering places where Vikings set sail. Others argue that it comes from Vikinger, a general term for people who engaged in sea expeditions, trade, or raiding. Another view suggests that the term originally described the action of going on an expedition, or voyaging, rather than identifying an ethnic group. There are even theories that it was initially a derogatory label used by hostile peoples to describe them. No matter which etymological theory is more convincing, all 6 share a remarkable commonality. They are connected to the sea, sailing, raiding, and exploring. In other words, Vikings were not a people defined by bloodline or language, but an embodiment of a maritime way of life. They weren't called Vikings because they were born into a nation of that name, but because they chose to take to the seas, to seek adventure, and to raid. Even more interesting is the fact that the term Viking was not widely used as a group identity during the Viking Age itself. In reality, it wasn't until the 18th century Scandinavian cultural revival that the word was repackaged in English into the image of the Viking we recognize today. This image is heavily romanticized and exaggerated. Horned helmets, which they actually never wore, muscular physiques, perhaps, perhaps not, and a wild, free-spirited nature. That part might be true. In reality, the modern use of the word Viking is not some age-old term passed down unchanged from the Viking Age. It actually gained popularity in the English-speaking world during the 18th century Viking revival, a time when there was a growing fascination with Norse mythology, wild aesthetics, and heroic romanticism. During this period, British and German scholars not only began translating the Edda poems and studying runestones, but also eagerly stuffed various Norse elements into a mold of noble savagery. As a result, the word Viking was polished and repackaged into the romanticized symbol of courage, conquest, and adventure that we know today. But did you know? Before the romanticized image of Vikings we have today, those axe-wielding raiders who stormed into your home were anything but romantic. They were often called Danes, Norsemen, or outright labeled as bloody heathens. Especially to the Christians of England and the Frankish lands, these pagan sea marauders who burned down churches were seen as disasters sent straight from hell. One of the most iconic Viking raids in history happened in the year 793 AD, the shocking Lindisfarne Monastery Massacre. A group of Vikings arrived by sea and launched a surprise attack on Lindisfarne Monastery in Northumbria, northeastern England. This monastery was not only a religious stronghold, but also a center of literature and education, housing precious handwritten Bibles and sacred relics. But on that day it was completely looted. Monks were killed, treasure stolen, buildings destroyed. This event was described in Christian records as God's punishment and pagan atrocities, and historians often mark it as the true beginning of the Viking Age. But if you think they were just simple raiders, then you're seriously underestimating them. While Vikings were indeed known for their plundering, their roots run deep in the soil of European civilization's evolution. They weren't aliens or suddenly appearing barbarians. Rather, they shared complex blood ties with the ancestors of the English, Germans, French, and even Spaniards, because they all came from ancient Germanic tribes. The term Germanic might sound like a single ethnicity, but it's not. It's more like a cultural and linguistic umbrella, a fuzzy concept meaning we're somewhat alike. These people lived in what is now Denmark, Norway, southern Sweden, and northern Germany. They spoke related languages, believed in polytheistic religions, used runic alphabets, and shared similar social structures and warrior aesthetics. This cultural resonance made them both scattered and closely connected, like a stretched web that was at once free and resilient. Starting from the 4th century AD, this Germanic web began to loosen, transforming into a sweeping superstorm across Europe, known historically as the Migration Period. Germanic tribes gradually moved south, east, and west. Some founded the Frankish kingdom, others took over the ruins of the Western Roman Empire, and some even reached the Iberian Peninsula, eventually becoming the ancestors of many Western European nations. In this highly fluid era of human history, the concept of national borders was basically non-existent. Who was an insider or an outsider wasn't determined by passports or skin color, but by the language you spoke, the gods you worshipped, the clothes you wore, and the customs you practiced. If you joined a tribe today, becoming their son-in-law, ally, or clergy, you might no longer be an outsider tomorrow. Within just a few years, a refugee fleeing famine could rise to become a local lord, relying not on bloodline, but on political skill and the ability to integrate into society. So, the idea of a pure bloodline simply didn't exist in that era. When modern people talk about pure Germanic or pure Anglo-Saxon heritage, that's really a historical reconstruction born from later nationalist movements. Back then, Vikings, Franks, Goths, Saxons, Angles, and even Celts all mixed together extensively. No one had an uncontaminated lineage. Everyone was part of a big historical melting pot, constantly clashing, blending, and evolving. In other words, Vikings weren't just primitive people who came out of icy wildernesses to kill and loot. They were some of the most adaptable and savvy players of their time, skillfully shifting identities and strategies. They were traders, migrants, mercenaries, colonizers, nobles, and some even converted to Christianity, married local women, and became kings of England, like Canute the Great, the Danish king who conquered England, or William the Conqueror, the Norman ruler descended from those Norsemen. In early medieval Northern Europe, being a Viking was more like a profession than a fixed ethnic group. Don't think that only people from certain bloodlines or families could become Vikings. In fact, they were free warriors brave enough to set sail in pursuit of adventure and glory, with their identity defined more by their actions than by their birth. Much like the Cossacks in history, Vikings were not synonymous with a single ethnicity, but rather a group of warriors sharing common ideals and a way of life. They loved the sea and excelled at raiding, but they were also skilled in trade and colonization. Viking longships were light and fast, capable of navigating both oceans and rivers with agility, allowing them to launch surprise attacks and retreat swiftly, always maintaining the upper hand. These Viking warriors possessed a strong sense of honor and operated by their own set of rules and principles. Though they appeared fierce, they valued unity and loyalty deeply. If you could speak a Nordic language, worship Odin, and master the art of rowing, you qualified to join their ranks and enjoy a life that was both free and exhilarating. They were not only warriors, but also merchants and explorers, boldly venturing into new worlds to establish their own colonies. You see, Vikings were far more than simple pirates. Behind their raids lay a fire forged by religion and conflict. At that time, Christianity was aggressively expanding under the power of Charlemagne. The massacre at Verdun in 782, where 4,500 Saxon pagan warriors were beheaded in one sweep, was not an isolated event, but a microcosm of the broader religious struggles engulfing Europe. The ancestors of the Vikings largely worshipped Odin and other Norse gods. Facing armed missionary efforts and oppression from Christians, they experienced not just a religious threat, but a dire struggle for survival. Driven into a corner with no way out, they chose to fight back, not as passive victims, but as warriors fueled by rage and conviction. They took to their longships and sailed out to raid those who persecuted them. This religious clash gave their raids a strong sense of retaliation. It made the Vikings even more fierce and fearless, because in their eyes it was a holy war, and those who died in battle would earn glory in Valhalla. Religion became the initial spark that ignited their seafaring ventures, fueling the fire that drove their daring and combat. Indeed, the infamous 793 raid on Lindisfarne that shocked Europe seemed on the surface like a brutal act of pillage, but underneath, It was a profound clash of beliefs erupting. The Vikings didn't burn down monasteries without cause. They were responding with force to religious oppression and threats to their very existence. This was not just robbery. It was a primal act of survival and resistance. In 9th century Northern Europe, during what is known as the medieval warm period, the climate became warmer and more humid. The land grew fertile, making it ideal for agriculture. At first glance, this seemed like a blessing. Rich farmland and abundant harvests led to thriving villages. However, this warm period also brought a significant challenge: a population boom. As the environment improved, the Nordic population grew rapidly, and the limited land began to fall short, creating an unprecedented dilemma for the younger generation of Viking warriors. Imagine being a young man without land. Your family's fields are already divided among elders and older brothers, leaving you without resources to produce or sustain a livelihood. Even worse, because of your family's limited status, marrying and starting your own household becomes a luxury out of reach. In such a social environment, staying home and playing by the rules offers no chance for advancement. Going out to sea and raiding became the only option. Armed with sword and longship, they set sail for England, France, and even more distant lands to seize wealth and territory. For them, this was more than just stealing money. It was a crucial path to changing their fate and fighting for space to survive. Women's roles were especially important in this context. Viking women were far more than just childbearing tools. They served as crucial links connecting families and tribes, facilitating political alliances. You might not imagine that in those times, wife capturing was not simply a brutal act of plunder, but a strategic form of political marriage. By marrying women from different tribes, Viking warriors could strengthen their power and even expand their cultural influence. This kind of capture was not blind violence, but a practical means to sustain the tribe's survival and development. Women were key to the tribe's continuation and served as bonds for building alliances and integrating diverse cultures. Even more importantly, population pressure drove the Vikings' motivation to expand outward. With local land and resources unable to meet the rapidly growing population's needs, the Vikings had no choice but to set sail on their longships, braving storms and warfare, heading toward Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and even North Africa. Their activities were not just about plundering, but also involved migration, trade, and colonization. The Vikings left their mark along the coasts of England, in Normandy, France, and even deep into the interior of Russia, influencing the political landscapes and cultural fabric of multiple European countries. This intertwined pressure of population and resources tightly fused the Vikings' spirit of adventure with their instinct for survival. They were not just hot-blooded warriors, but also adaptable merchants and colonizers. This expedition culture, born out of demographic challenges, profoundly influenced the trajectory of later European development, leaving deep marks on language, religion, and social structures. When people think of Vikings, the first images that often come to mind are their mighty axes swung fiercely and their longships cutting through the waves of the North Sea. Indeed, the legends of Viking raids have echoed for centuries, but they were far more than mindless pirates. They were among the most skilled merchants of the ancient world. Yes, you heard that right. Vikings were also outstanding traders, arguably the trade masters of ancient Europe. Their trade networks were astonishingly vast, stretching far beyond their Nordic homelands and connecting the three major cultural spheres of their time. Imagine a web of commerce extending from Kievan Rus in the east to the Byzantine Empire's capital Constantinople in the south, and further into the Islamic world. Viking merchant ships and trade routes wove together these regions like an intricate spiderweb. This vast network not only brought wealth, but also made the Vikings well-informed about the political and economic conditions across diverse lands, turning them into crucial hubs for the flow of information. Even more impressive, the Vikings established cities and ports at key locations, such as the famous Birka and Hedeby, which became crucial hubs connecting Scandinavia with the wider world. You can think of these cities as ancient international trade centers, bustling with activity as silks, spices, and jewels from the east, ceramics and glassware from the south, and furs, timber, and metals from the north all changed hands there. Moreover, Viking trade and raiding were not entirely opposed activities. Raids often served as a tough bargaining tactic in commerce. Vikings would use raids to coerce local populations into paying protection money tributes, effectively creating a system of armed protection trade. This two-pronged strategy made them not only plunderers, but also powerful economic players in the marketplace. On the political front, Western Europe was mired in chaos and fragmentation. England was embroiled in the turmoil of the Heptarchy, and the Frankish kingdom was fractured by internal divisions. Such political vacuums presented a golden opportunity for the Vikings. Imagine a band of skilled seafarers observing their enemies' internal conflicts raging. What better moment to kill with a borrowed knife? Thus, the Vikings' footsteps were no longer limited to raiding and pillaging. They began to establish themselves steadily, transforming from pirates into settlers, and then into rulers. These Viking pirates were actually savvy political players. They would stay behind to marry local women, build families, and even start constructing castles and defensive fortifications. Over time, they ceased to be mere visitors and became the true owners of the land. The name Ragnar Lothbrok is almost legendary in Viking lore, known by all. He was not only a fierce warrior, but also a leader with sharp political acumen. Ragnar led Viking armies to capture Paris, laying the foundation for Viking footholds in Western Europe. His exploits were sung in poems and continually dramatized in later films and television. Even more remarkable, his sons inherited his will and continued to wreak havoc across the British Isles, ultimately establishing the famous Danelaw, a region in northern and eastern England ruled by Vikings. During this period, wars between the English and Vikings saw victories and defeats on both sides, with no clear winner. English monarchs, such as Alfred the Great and Edmund II, demonstrated remarkable resilience and wisdom, leading the Anglo-Saxons to gradually reclaim lost territories and eventually form a more stable kingdom. It can be said that the Viking invasions accelerated the unification of English tribes and helped spur the rise of stronger centralized rule. History is always filled with drama and cycles. In 1013, King Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark led his army to conquer England, marking the beginning of the Vikings' second era of rule over the land. This time, it was more than mere plundering. Sweyn brought about a profound political and cultural impact. His son, Canute the Great, went further by uniting England, Denmark, and Norway into the only North Sea empire in history that spanned across the sea. This was not just territorial expansion. It symbolized a transformation in Viking identity, from lawless raiders to legitimate kings and rulers. Canute the Great was not only a Christian, but also actively modeled his governance on Western European practices, which helped Viking culture gradually integrate with the Christian world. This strengthened their political systems and allowed the Vikings to become part of the mainstream European civilization. This transformation was a glorious chapter in the Viking Age, but ultimately, they could not escape the tides of history. By 1066, Norwegian King Harald Hardrada was defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, a battle that symbolized the official end of Viking military power. From then on, the era of the Vikings as Nordic raiders came to a close, but their influence was far from over. Among the descendants of the Vikings, the most famous are undoubtedly the Normans of France. They originated from the mixed blood of Vikings and local Franks, later conquered England, participated in the Crusades, and even established the Kingdom of Sicily in the Mediterranean. These achievements left a profound mark on European history. In this way, the Vikings continued to influence the political and cultural trajectory of Europe through the Normans. Moreover, the Viking language has deeply embedded itself in modern English. Many everyday words we use, like sky, egg, knife, and window, are legacies borrowed from Old Norse. These words serve as quiet reminders of history, showing us that Vikings were not just rugged warriors from ancient legends, but an inseparable part of European culture. Viking mythology, with names like Odin, Thor, and Loki, has long become emblematic of Nordic culture. These stories are not only preserved in ancient poems, but have also transcended time to leap onto Hollywood's big screen, capturing the imaginations of audiences worldwide. The superhero Thor, swinging his mighty hammer, actually has roots in Viking beliefs. This cultural export has breathed new life into Old Norse mythology and helped many people better understand the brave warriors from the north. If you think Vikings were just a bunch of brutal barbarians, you couldn't be more wrong. They were far more than axe-wielding pirates. They were among the most adaptable and politically savvy cultural integrators of the ancient world. From their origins as raiders, they gradually transformed into true rulers who knew how to establish governments, blend with local cultures, and even create governance systems suited to their time. This transformation not only demonstrated their intelligence, but also allowed Viking culture to take deep root in the soil of European history. What the Vikings left behind in Europe was not just burning flames and swinging swords. They sparked cultural fire, bright flashes in the collision of ancient civilizations. Their stories and beliefs, their language and laws, as well as the cities and trade routes they built, all became indispensable parts of European civilization. The Viking spirit is like a flame in the northern cold wind, weathered but still illuminating history's long night, influencing our present and future. From village-burning raiders to land-expanding settlers, from Odin-worshipping pagans to kings seated on European thrones, the Viking saga is like their longships, swift, flexible, and awe-inspiring. This is not merely a pirate legend, but a profound historical record that shaped the world's map and cultural memory. What they left behind was not just blood and fire, but language, mythology, institutions, and a spirit of freedom that defied fate and rules, a spirit that still captivates us today. If you enjoy these epic stories filled with historical drama and human struggles, please like, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any tales of the Northern Warriors. Feel free to leave a comment below telling us, what aspect of the Vikings fascinates you the most? Would you like us to create a deep dive episode about Viking shield maidens or Norse mythology? And don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves history, is fascinated by myths, or is seeking courage and freedom.